I was lying face down on a concrete floor in a warehouse I didn't recognize, hands zip-tied behind my back, blood dripping from my nose onto the cold ground. Three men stood over me. One of them was smoking a cigarette. Another was counting money. The third one, the one who'd hit me, was on the phone saying, "Yeah, we got him. Your old man's right here." Then he handed the phone to me, pressed it against my ear, and I heard my son's voice. My only son, Terrence. He said, "I'm sorry, Pops. I had no choice." That's when I knew my boy had sold me to pay off his gambling debts. The men wanted $12,000. I had maybe 300 in my account. That was 4 years ago. My name is Marcus Webb. I'm 55 years old. I lived in Richmond, Virginia when all this happened. Before you hear the rest, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from, because what I'm about to tell you might sound like a movie, but every word of it is real. The man with the cigarette kicked me in the ribs. Not hard enough to break anything, but hard enough to remind me I wasn't in control anymore. I coughed and tasted copper. The warehouse smelled like oil and rust. There were old tires stacked in the corner and a single bulb hanging from the ceiling, swinging slightly like it was breathing. I could hear trucks passing on the highway outside. My heart was pounding so loud I thought they could hear it. The man counting money looked at me like I was a piece of furniture. He said, "Your son owes us 12 grand. You got 12 grand? I shook my head. He laughed. It wasn't a friendly laugh. It was the kind of laugh that said my life didn't matter to him. I thought about Terrence. I thought about the last time I saw him, 3 weeks before this, when he came to my apartment asking for $500. I gave it to him. I always gave it to him. Terrence wasn't always like this. When he was 7 years old, he used to sit on the porch with me every Sunday evening after church, and we'd watch the sun go down over the neighborhood. He'd ask me questions about everything: why the sky turned orange, why dogs barked at cars, why his mama left us. I didn't always have the answers, but I tried. His mama, Diane, walked out when he was 5. Said she couldn't do it anymore. Said Richmond was suffocating her. Said I was suffocating her. I didn't fight her. I just let her go. Maybe that was my first mistake. After she left, it was just me and Terrence in a 2-bedroom apartment on North Side, trying to figure out how to be a family with one person missing. I worked double shifts at the Goodyear plant, came home smelling like rubber and sweat, and tried to cook dinners that didn't come out of a box. Terrence never complained. He'd sit at the table and eat whatever I made, even if it was burnt. He'd tell me about school, about his friends, about the girl he liked in 4th grade. I thought we were doing okay. By the time he turned 16, something had changed. He stopped talking as much, started staying out late. I'd ask him where he'd been, and he'd shrug and say, "Out." I didn't push. I thought it was just him being a teenager. I thought he'd grow out of it. His grades started slipping. He got suspended twice, once for fighting, once for skipping class. I sat him down and tried to talk to him, tried to tell him he was smarter than this, that he had potential. He looked at me like I was speaking a foreign language. He said, "You don't get it, Pops. You don't get anything." I didn't know what he meant. I worked my whole life to give him a roof over his head, food on the table, clothes on his back. What didn't I get? He started hanging around a kid named Deshaun who lived in the apartments across the street. Deshaun was trouble. I could see it in the way he walked, the way he talked, the way he looked at people like they owed him something. I told Terrence to stay away from him. Terrence didn't listen. When Terrence turned 18, he moved out. Got a place with Deshaun and two other guys I'd never met. I didn't want him to go, but I didn't stop him. I thought maybe he needed space. Maybe he needed to figure things out on his own. I gave him money when he asked for it. Not a lot, but enough. 100 here, 200 there. He never told me what it was for, and I never asked. I just wanted to help. I just wanted him to know I was still there. For a while, we'd talk on the phone every couple of weeks. He'd call and ask how I was doing, tell me he was doing fine, tell me he'd stop by soon. He never did. The calls got shorter. The gaps between them got longer. By the time he turned 23, I hadn't seen him in 6 months. I'd drive by his apartment sometimes just to see if his car was there. Sometimes it was. Sometimes it wasn't. I never knocked on the door. I didn't want to seem desperate, but I was desperate. I missed my son. Then one night, 3 weeks before I ended up in that warehouse, Terrence showed up at my door. It was late, almost midnight. He looked terrible. His eyes were red. His hands were shaking. He said he needed $500. I asked him what for. He said it didn't matter. I asked him if he was in trouble. He said no. I didn't believe him, but I gave him the money anyway. He hugged me. It was the first time he'd hugged me in years. He said, "Thanks, Pops. I'll pay you back." I said, "Don't worry about it. Just be safe." He left. I stood at the door and watched him walk down the hallway, and I had this feeling in my chest, this heavy, sinking feeling that I just made a mistake, that I should have asked more questions, that I should have told him to stay, but I didn't. I just closed the door and went to bed. 3 weeks later, I was on that warehouse floor with my hands tied behind my back, and my son's voice was on the other end of the phone saying, "I'm sorry, Pops. I had no choice." And I thought, what did I miss? Where did I go wrong? I raised Terrence to be better than me. That's what I told myself every day when I woke up at 5 in the morning to get to the plant. I didn't finish high school. Dropped out when I was 16 because my own daddy died and somebody had to pay the bills. I worked construction jobs, warehouse jobs, anything that would take me. By the time I was 22, I was at Goodyear, and I stayed there for 30 years. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't easy, but it was steady. I told Terrence he didn't have to do what I did. I told him he could go to college, get a degree, wear a suit to work instead of coveralls. I told him he had options. He'd nod and say, "I know, Pops." But I don't think he believed me. I don't think he believed in much of anything. When he was 10, I took him to a Redskins game, saved up for months to afford the tickets. We drove up to D.C. early in the morning, and I remember how excited he was. He wore his little burgundy and gold jersey and a cap that was too big for his head. We sat in the nosebleed section, but he didn't care. He cheered so loud his voice went hoarse. We ate overpriced hot dogs and drank watered-down sodas, and for those 3 hours, everything felt perfect. On the drive home, he fell asleep in the passenger seat with his cap pulled down over his eyes, and I looked over at him and thought, this is what it's all about. This is why I work so hard. I wanted to give him moments like that. I wanted him to remember his daddy as someone who tried, someone who cared. I thought that would be enough, but it wasn't. By the time he hit his teenage years, nothing I did seemed to matter. I'd ask him about school, and he'd grunt. I'd ask him about his friends, and he'd shrug. I'd ask him if he wanted to go to a game or a movie, and he'd say he was busy. I didn't know how to reach him anymore. I didn't know how to compete with whatever was pulling him away from me. I tried talking to him about his mama, about why she left, thinking maybe he needed closure. He just looked at me and said, "I don't care about her, Pops. I don't care about any of this." That hurt more than I wanted to admit. I started working more hours just to avoid the silence at home. The apartment felt emptier every day, even when he was still living there. I'd come home and find him in his room with the door closed, music blaring, and I'd just heat up leftovers and eat alone at the kitchen table. One night when he was 17, I found a betting slip in his jeans pocket while doing laundry. It was for a college basketball game. $500 on Duke to cover the spread. I didn't even know where he'd gotten $500. I confronted him about it, and he exploded. Told me to stay out of his business. Told me I didn't understand. Told me I was just a factory worker who didn't know anything about the real world. I slapped him. I'd never hit him before, and I've regretted it every day since. He didn't say anything, just stared at me with this cold, hard look, grabbed his jacket, and walked out. He didn't come home for 3 days. When he finally did, neither of us mentioned it. We just went back to pretending everything was fine. But it wasn't fine. Something had broken between us, and I didn't know how to fix it. I should have seen the signs. I should have known that betting slip wasn't a one-time thing. I should have pushed harder, asked more questions, made him talk to me. But I didn't. I was too tired, too defeated, too afraid of losing him completely. So I just let it slide. I let a lot of things slide. And by the time I realized how deep he was in, it was too late. He'd already crossed a line I didn't even know existed. He'd already made choices I couldn't undo. And somewhere along the way, the boy I raised, the boy who used to ask me why the sky turned orange, had disappeared. In his place was a stranger who would sell his own father to men who didn't care if I lived or died. That's the part that still keeps me up at night. Not the betrayal, not the warehouse, but the question, when did I lose him, and could I have stopped it? 3 weeks before everything fell apart, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was late, almost 11 at night. I almost didn't answer, but something told me to pick up. It was Terrence. His voice sounded strange, tight, like he was trying not to cry. He said, "Pops, I need to see you." I sat up in bed, my heart already racing. I said, "What's wrong? Are you okay?" He said, I need to talk to you. Can I come over?" I said yes. 20 minutes later, he was at my door. He looked worse than I'd ever seen him. His clothes were wrinkled. His eyes were bloodshot. He smelled like cigarettes and something else I couldn't place. Fear, maybe. Desperation. I let him in, made him sit down on the couch, asked if he wanted something to eat. He shook his head, just sat there staring at the floor, his leg bouncing up and down like he couldn't sit still. I sat down next to him and waited. I didn't push. I'd learned a long time ago that pushing Terrence only made him shut down. After a few minutes, he finally spoke. He said, "I messed up, Pops. I messed up bad." I asked him what happened. He didn't answer right away, just kept staring at the floor. Then he said, "I owe some people money. A lot of money." I felt my stomach drop. I asked him how much. He hesitated. Then he said, 12,000. I couldn't breathe. $12,000. I didn't have $12,000. I didn't even have 1,200. I asked him how he got into that kind of debt. He said gambling, sports betting, poker, all of it. I thought I could win it back, but I just kept losing. I wanted to yell at him. I wanted to grab him by the shoulders and shake him and ask him how he could be so stupid. But I didn't. I just sat there trying to process what he was telling me. He started crying. Not loud, ugly crying, just quiet tears running down his face. He said, "They're gonna hurt me, Pops. These guys don't mess around. They're serious." I asked him who they were. He said, "Just some guys. You don't know them." I asked if he'd gone to the police. He laughed, a bitter, broken sound. He said, "The police can't help me. These guys aren't scared of the police." I asked him what he wanted me to do. He looked at me with those red, desperate eyes and said, "I need $500 just to buy me some time, just so I can figure something out." $500. I had it. Barely. It was most of what I had in my checking account, money I needed for rent and groceries and my electric bill. But he was my son. I couldn't say no. I got up, went to my bedroom, and came back with the cash. I handed it to him. He took it, and for the first time in years, he hugged me. A real hug. Tight and desperate. He said, "Thank you, Pops. I'll fix this. I promise." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that $500 would solve the problem, that he'd find a way out, that everything would be okay. But deep down, I knew better. Deep down, I knew this wasn't the end of it. I asked him if he had a plan. He nodded, but he didn't look at me when he did it. He just stuffed the money in his pocket and stood up. He said, "I gotta go. I'll call you soon." I walked him to the door, and as he was leaving, I grabbed his arm. I said, "Terrence, if you're in real trouble, you need to tell me. Don't try to handle this alone." He looked at me, and for just a second, I saw the little boy he used to be. The boy who sat on the porch with me and asked about the sky. Then the look was gone. He pulled his arm away and said, "I got it, Pops. Don't worry." And then he was gone. I stood at the door for a long time after he left, just staring at the empty hallway. Something felt wrong. Something felt off. But I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to help him. So I just closed the door, went back to bed, and tried to sleep. But I couldn't. I lay there staring at the ceiling, replaying the conversation in my head, trying to figure out what I should have said or done differently. I thought about calling him back, but I didn't. I thought about going after him, but I didn't. I just lay there, paralyzed by fear and uncertainty, while my son walked deeper into a hole I couldn't see. 3 weeks later, I'd be lying on a warehouse floor, hands tied, blood on my face, listening to his voice say, "I'm sorry, Pops. I had no choice." And I'd realize that night was my last chance. That was the moment I could have stopped everything. But I didn't. And that's something I'll carry with me for the rest of my life. It was a Tuesday afternoon when they grabbed me. I remember because Tuesdays were always slow at the plant. Just maintenance work, nothing heavy. I'd clocked out at 3 and stopped by the grocery store on my way home. Bought some chicken, rice, a bag of apples. Normal stuff. I was walking to my car in the parking lot, keys in my hand, when a van pulled up next to me. Dark blue, no windows in the back. The side door slid open, and before I could react, 2 men jumped out. One of them grabbed my arm. The other one punched me in the stomach so hard I dropped my grocery bag. Apples rolled across the pavement. I tried to yell, but I couldn't breathe. They shoved me into the van, and the door slammed shut. The whole thing took maybe 10 seconds. Nobody in the parking lot even noticed. Inside the van, they pushed me down onto the floor. One of them pressed his knee into my back, while the other one zip-tied my hands. I was gasping for air, trying to ask what was happening, but they didn't say a word. The van started moving. I could feel every turn, every bump in the road. My ribs ached where the guy had punched me. My wrists burned from the plastic ties cutting into my skin. I tried to stay calm, tried to think, but my mind was racing. Who were these people? What did they want? Was this a robbery? A kidnapping? Then I thought about Terrence, about the $12,000 he owed, about the $500 I'd given him. And I knew this had something to do with him. I just didn't know how bad it was yet. We drove for maybe 20 minutes. It felt like hours. When the van finally stopped, they pulled me out and dragged me into a building. I could barely see. The punch to my stomach had left me dizzy. But I caught glimpses. Concrete walls, metal shelves, a flickering light bulb. It was a warehouse. Old, abandoned, the kind of place where bad things happen and nobody hears you scream. They threw me down onto the floor, and I landed hard on my shoulder. Pain shot through my arm. I rolled onto my back trying to get my bearings, and that's when I saw them. 3 men. One was tall and thin, smoking a cigarette like he had all the time in the world. Another was shorter, stockier, counting a stack of cash with a bored expression. The third one, the one who'd punched me, stood over me with his arms crossed. He had a scar running down the side of his face. He looked at me like I was nothing. The tall one with the cigarette crouched down next to me. He blew smoke in my face and said, "You Marcus Webb?" I nodded. My voice was gone. He smiled, not a friendly smile, a predator's smile. He said, "Your boy Terrence owes us $12,000. You know anything about that?" I shook my head. He stood up, kicked me in the ribs, not hard, just enough to make a point, and said, "Don't lie to me, old man. We know he came to you. We know you gave him $500. That's cute, but it ain't enough." The guy counting money laughed. He said, "500 don't even cover the interest." I tried to speak, tried to explain that I didn't have $12,000, that I was just a factory worker, that Terrence was an adult, and I couldn't control what he did. But before I could get the words out, the tall one crouched down again. This time he wasn't smiling. He pulled out his phone, dialed a number, and waited. After a few seconds he said, "Yeah, we got him. Your old man's right here." Then he pressed the phone to my ear. I heard breathing on the other end. Then a voice. Terrence's voice. He said, "Pops?" I wanted to scream at him. I wanted to ask him what the hell he'd done, why these men had grabbed me, how he could let this happen. But all I managed to say was, "Terrence, what's going on?" There was a long silence. Then he said, "I'm sorry, Pops. I didn't have a choice. They said if I didn't give them something, they'd kill me. I told them about you. I told them you'd help." My blood went cold. He'd sold me out. My own son had given these men my name, my address, my life, just to save his own skin. The tall man took the phone back, hung up, and looked down at me. He said, "You got 48 hours to come up with 12 grand. If you don't, we're going to start breaking bones. You understand?" I nodded. What else could I do? They didn't let me go right away. They kept me in that warehouse for hours just to make sure I understood how serious they were. The tall one with the cigarette, I heard the others call him Vic, sat on a crate across from me, smoking and watching me like I was some kind of science experiment. The guy with the scar paced back and forth, cracking his knuckles. The one counting money didn't even look at me. He just kept flipping through bills like I wasn't there. I sat on the cold concrete floor, hands still tied, trying to figure out how I was going to survive this. $12,000 in 48 hours. I didn't have it. I didn't have half of it. I didn't even have a tenth of it. My savings account had maybe $800. That was it. 30 years at Goodyear, and that's all I had to show for it. Vic finally spoke again. He said, "You got family, friends, somebody who can help you out?" I shook my head. My parents were dead. I didn't have siblings. I had a few guys I worked with at the plant, but none of them had that kind of money either. Vic shrugged. He said, "Then you better get creative. Rob a bank. Sell your car. I don't care. Just get the money." He stood up, dropped his cigarette on the floor, and crushed it with his boot. Then he walked over to me, crouched down, and said, "If you don't come through, we're coming back for you. And next time, it won't be a conversation." He nodded to the guy with the scar, who pulled out a knife and cut the zip ties off my wrists. My hands were numb. I couldn't feel my fingers. Vic grabbed me by the collar and pulled me to my feet. He said, "We'll be in touch. Don't even think about running. We know where you live." They shoved me out of the warehouse and into the van again. This time, they didn't tie me up. They just drove me back to the grocery store parking lot where they grabbed me and dumped me out onto the pavement. My grocery bag was still there. Apples scattered everywhere. Chicken probably spoiled by now. I sat there for a minute, just trying to catch my breath, trying to process what had just happened. My ribs ached. My wrists were raw. My mind was spinning. I picked up my keys, got in my car, and drove home in a daze. When I got to my apartment, I locked the door, sat down on the couch, and stared at the wall. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just sat there numb, trying to figure out what to do next. I thought about calling the police. But what would I tell them? That my son owed money to some gamblers and they'd kidnapped me? The police would ask questions I couldn't answer. They'd want names, addresses, details I didn't have. And even if they did take me seriously, what could they do? These guys weren't amateurs. They knew what they were doing. They knew how to stay off the radar. And if I went to the cops, they'd find out. They'd come back. They'd hurt me. Or worse, they'd hurt Terrence. I didn't care what he'd done to me. He was still my son. I couldn't put him in more danger. So calling the police was out. I thought about calling Terrence, but I didn't even know what I'd say to him. I was angry. I was hurt. I was scared. But more than anything, I was confused. How did we get here? How did my boy, my only boy, end up in a situation where he'd sell his own father to pay off a debt? I spent the next 2 days trying to come up with the money. I checked my savings, $843. I checked my checking account, $212. I called the bank and asked about a loan. They laughed at me. My credit was terrible. I hadn't paid off a car loan from 10 years ago. I was behind on my rent. There was no way they were giving me $12,000. I thought about selling my car, but it was 20 years old and barely ran. I'd be lucky to get $500 for it. I thought about asking my coworkers, but I was too ashamed. I didn't want them to know what was happening. I didn't want them to know my son had done this to me. So I sat in my apartment, paralyzed, watching the clock tick down, knowing that in less than 48 hours, those men were going to come back. And I had no idea what I was going to tell them. On the second day, Vic called me. I don't know how he got my number, but I wasn't surprised. These guys seemed to know everything. He didn't say hello, just said, "You got the money?" I told him no. There was a long silence. Then he said, "That's disappointing, Marcus. Real disappointing. Guess we'll have to come see you tonight." He hung up. I sat there holding the phone, my hands shaking. I thought about running, packing a bag, getting in my car, and just driving. Maybe I could disappear. Maybe I could start over somewhere else. But where would I go? I didn't have money for gas, let alone a new life. And even if I ran, they'd find me. Guys like that always find you. So I didn't run. I just sat there and waited. Around 8 o'clock that night, there was a knock on my door. Not a polite knock. A heavy, demanding bang that rattled the frame. I got up slowly, my heart pounding, and looked through the peephole. It was them, Vic and the guy with the scar. I thought about not opening the door, but what good would that do? They'd just break it down. So I unlocked it and stepped back. They walked in like they owned the place. Vic looked around, taking in my tiny apartment with a smirk. He said, "Nice place. Real homey." The guy with the scar didn't say anything, just stood there with his arms crossed, blocking the door. Vic walked over to my couch and sat down. He said, "So, you don't got the money. That means we got a problem." I told him I was sorry. I told him I tried. I told him I didn't have anything left to give. Vic nodded like he understood. Then he said, "Here's the thing, Marcus. I believe you, I do, but belief don't pay debts. So we got to figure something else out." He leaned back on the couch, putting his feet up on my coffee table like he was at home. He said, "Your boy Terrence, he's a piece of work. You know that, right? He's the one who got you into this mess. He's the one who gave us your name. And now he's hiding somewhere, probably hoping we'll just forget about him. But we don't forget." He looked at me with those cold, dead eyes and said, "So here's what's going to happen. Since you can't pay, you're going to work it off." I asked him what he meant. He smiled, that predator smile. He said, "You're going to do some jobs for us, deliveries, pickups, whatever we need. You do that, we'll call it even." I didn't want to do it. I didn't want anything to do with these people. But what choice did I have? I asked him what kind of jobs. He said, "Don't worry about it. Nothing too heavy. You're old, but you're not useless." The guy with the scar laughed. Vic stood up, walked over to me, and put his hand on my shoulder. That, he said, "You start tomorrow. We'll be in touch." Then they left, just like that. I stood there in my apartment, door still open, feeling like I just signed my life away. I closed the door, locked it, and sat down on the couch. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat there, thinking about Terrence, thinking about how we got here, thinking about what I was going to have to do to survive. The next morning, Vic called me at 6 a.m. He gave me an address and told me to be there by 7. I got dressed, got in my car, and drove to a storage unit on the east side of town. Vic was waiting for me. He handed me a duffel bag and said, "Take this to an address in Southside. Don't open it. Don't ask questions. Just drop it off and come back." I took the bag. It was heavy. I didn't ask what was in it. I didn't want to know. I drove to the address, knocked on the door, handed the bag to a guy who looked like he hadn't slept in days, and left. When I got back, Vic was gone. But there was a note on my windshield. It said, "Good job, we'll call you." That was my life for the next 3 weeks. Deliveries, pickups, driving all over Richmond with duffel bags and packages I didn't open. I became a mule, a nobody. And the whole time I hated my son for putting me in this position. I didn't hear from Terrence for almost a month. No calls, no texts, nothing. I thought maybe he'd left town. Maybe he'd started over somewhere else. Part of me hoped he had. Part of me hoped I'd never see him again. But another part of me, the part that was still his father, wanted to know he was okay, wanted to know he was alive. Then one night he showed up at my door. It was late, past midnight. I was half asleep on the couch when I heard the knock. I got up, looked through the peephole, and there he was. He looked terrible, worse than before. His face was bruised, his lip was split, his clothes were dirty. I opened the door, and he stumbled in like he could barely stand. I asked him what happened. He didn't answer, just collapsed onto the couch and put his head in his hands. I stood there looking at him, feeling a mix of anger and pity I didn't know how to process. I wanted to yell at him. I wanted to tell him what I'd been through because of him. But looking at him like that, broken and beaten, I couldn't do it. I asked him if he was okay. He shook his head. He said, "They found me, Pops, Vic and his guys. They beat the hell out of me." I asked him why. He said, "Because I didn't have the money. Because I told them I'd get it and I didn't. Because I'm a screw-up." He started crying. Not quiet tears this time. Full-on sobbing. He said, "I'm sorry, Pops. I'm so sorry for what I did to you." I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to forgive him. Part of me wanted to throw him out and never speak to him again. I sat down next to him and just let him cry. After a while, he wiped his face and said, "I heard what they made you do. The deliveries. I heard you've been working for them." I asked him how he knew. He said, "I still got people who talk to me. They told me you've been running packages all over town." He looked at me with those red, swollen eyes and said, "You shouldn't have done that. You should have just let them come after me." I told him I didn't have a choice. He said, "You always have a choice, Pops. You just always choose me, even when I don't deserve it." He was right. I did always choose him, even when it hurt me, even when it destroyed me, because he was my son, because I loved him, because I didn't know how to do anything else. I asked him what he was going to do now. He said, "I don't know. I can't keep running. I can't keep doing this." I told him he needed to get help, real help, rehab for the gambling, therapy, something. He nodded, but I could tell he didn't believe it would work. He said, "I'm broken, Pops. I don't know how to fix myself." I put my hand on his shoulder and said, "Then let me help you." He looked at me like I just said the most ridiculous thing in the world. He said, "You can't help me. You've been helping me my whole life, and look where it got us." He stood up, walked to the door, and turned back one last time. He said, "I'm going to make this right. I promise." Then he left. And I knew deep down that I might never see him again. 2 days later, I got a call from a detective. He said his name was Rivers. He said Terrence had been arrested. My heart stopped. I asked him what for. He said armed robbery. He and 2 other men tried to hold up a check-cashing place on Broad Street. Security guards shot one of them. Your son got away, but we picked him up a few hours later. I couldn't breathe. I asked if he was okay. Detective Rivers said, "Physically, yeah, but he's looking at serious time. We're talking 10 to 15 years. I hung up the phone and just sat there staring at the wall. My son, my boy, a criminal, an armed robber. I didn't even know who he was anymore. I went to see him at the jail the next day. They brought him out in an orange jumpsuit, hands cuffed, looking like a ghost. We sat across from each other with a thick pane of glass between us, talking through phones like we were strangers. I asked him why he did it. He said, "I needed the money, Pops. I thought if I could get enough, I could pay Vic off and get you out of this mess." I told him that was the dumbest thing I'd ever heard. He said, "Maybe," but I had to try. I asked him if he thought about what would happen if he got caught. He said, "I didn't care. I just wanted you to be free." His voice cracked. He said, "You've been cleaning up my messes my whole life. I thought maybe just this once I could clean one up for you." I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to reach through that glass and shake him. Part of me wanted to tell him he was an idiot, that he just made everything worse, that now he was going to prison and I was still stuck working for Vic. But another part of me, the part that remembered him as a little boy asking about the sky, just felt sad. Sad for him, sad for me, sad for what we become. I asked him what his lawyer said. He shrugged. He said, "Public defender says I should take a plea deal. 7 years if I'm lucky. Maybe out in 5 with good behavior. 7 years. My son would be 30 years old when he got out. Half his 20s gone." I asked him if that's what he was going to do. He said, "I don't have a choice, Pops. The evidence is all there. Security footage, witnesses, everything. I'm cooked." We sat there in silence for a while, just looking at each other through that glass. Finally, he said, "I need you to do something for me." I asked him what. He said, "Stop working for Vic. Whatever he's got you doing, stop. Get out before it's too late." I told him I couldn't. I told him Vic said I owed him for the $12,000, and until I worked it off, I was stuck. Terrence shook his head. He said, "He's lying, Pops. He's using you. Once you're in with guys like that, they never let you go. You'll be working for him until you're dead or in prison yourself." I told him I didn't have another option. He leaned forward, his face pressed against the glass, and said, "Then make one. Please. Don't let me destroy you too." The guard came and told us time was up. Terrence stood up, and I watched them take him back through the door. I sat there for a few more minutes, phone still in my hand, trying to process everything. My son was going to prison. I was working for criminals, and I had no idea how to fix any of it. When I finally left the jail, I sat in my car in the parking lot and cried for the first time in years. Not quiet tears, ugly, heaving sobs that made my whole body shake. I cried for Terrence. I cried for myself. I cried for all the choices we'd made that led us here. And when I was done, I wiped my face, started the car, and drove home. Because what else was I going to do? That night, Vic called me with another job. He wanted me to pick up a package from an apartment in Henrico and deliver it to a warehouse in Petersburg. I told him I couldn't do it. He said, "Excuse me?" I said, "I'm done. I've been working for you for a month. I've paid my debt. I'm out." There was a long silence on the other end. Then Vic laughed. He said, "You think you're done? Marcus, you're not even close to done. You work for me until I say you're done. And right now I say you're not done." I told him I didn't care what he said. I told him I wasn't doing it anymore. He stopped laughing. His voice went cold. He said, "You got 24 hours to change your mind. If you don't, we're going to have a problem. And trust me, you don't want that problem." Then he hung up. I didn't change my mind. The next day, I didn't answer when Vic called. I turned off my phone and stayed in my apartment with the door locked and the curtains drawn. I knew what I was doing was stupid. I knew it was dangerous, but I was tired. Tired of being scared. Tired of being used. Tired of living a life that didn't feel like mine anymore. I thought maybe if I ignored him long enough, he'd move on, find someone else to run his packages. But guys like Vic don't move on. They make examples. Around 10 o'clock that night, someone kicked in my door. It flew open with a crash that sounded like a gunshot. I jumped up from the couch, and before I could even react, 2 men rushed in. One of them was the guy with the scar. The other was someone I'd never seen before. Bigger, meaner looking. They grabbed me, slammed me against the wall, and the guy with the scar put a gun to my head. He said, "Vic's real disappointed in you, old man." I could feel the cold metal of the gun pressing against my temple. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might explode. The other guy punched me in the stomach, and I doubled over, gasping for air. They dragged me out of my apartment and down the stairs. A few of my neighbors peeked out of their doors, but nobody said anything. Nobody helped. They just watched as these men threw me into the back of a van and drove off. I knew where we were going. Back to the warehouse. Back to where this all started. I thought about Terrence. I thought about him sitting in that jail cell, telling me to get out before it was too late. I should have listened. I should have left town. I should have done something. But I didn't, and now I was going to pay for it. When we got to the warehouse, they dragged me inside and threw me down on the same concrete floor where I'd been a month ago. Vic was there, sitting on a crate, smoking a cigarette. He looked at me the way you'd look at a piece of trash on the sidewalk. He said, "I gave you a chance, Marcus. I gave you a simple job. All you had to do was drive a few packages around. That's it. But you had to go and grow a backbone." He stood up, walked over to me, and kicked me in the ribs. Pain exploded through my side. I coughed, tasted blood. He crouched down next to me and said, "You know what happens to people who disrespect me? They disappear, and nobody even remembers their names." The guy with the scar laughed. Vic pulled out his phone and made a call. He said, "Yeah, bring the car around. We're going to take him for a ride." I thought I was going to die. I thought they were going to drive me out to some field and put a bullet in my head. I closed my eyes and thought about Terrence. I thought about the life I'd lived, 30 years at a factory, raising a son who ended up in prison, and now this. Dying in a warehouse because I couldn't pay off a debt I never owed in the first place. It felt like a waste. Like my whole life had been leading up to this moment of pointless violence. But then something happened. The warehouse door burst open, and I heard shouting, "Police! Hands up! Don't move!" I opened my eyes and saw cops flooding in, guns drawn. Vic and his guys didn't even have time to react. Within seconds, they were on the ground, hands behind their backs, being cuffed. Someone helped me to my feet. It was Detective Rivers, the cop who'd called me about Terrence. He said, "You okay, Mr. Webb?" I nodded, even though I wasn't. My ribs were broken. My face was bleeding. But I was alive. Rivers said, "Your son told us everything. He gave us names, addresses, details about Vic's operation, said you were in danger and we needed to move fast." I couldn't believe it. Terrence had saved me. From jail, facing 7 years, he'd still found a way to help. Rivers walked me out of the warehouse, and I saw Vic being shoved into the back of a police car. He looked at me through the window, and I could see the hate in his eyes. But I didn't care. It was over. He couldn't touch me anymore. I got in an ambulance, and they took me to the hospital. As I lay on the stretcher staring up at the ceiling, I thought about my son, about what he'd done, about the fact that even after everything, after the lies, the betrayal, the debt, he'd still tried to save me. And I didn't know how to feel about that. They kept me in the hospital for 3 days. Broken ribs, internal bruising, a concussion. The doctor said I was lucky. If the cops had shown up 5 minutes later, I probably wouldn't have made it. Detective Rivers came by on the second day to take my statement. I told him everything, about Terrence's debt, about the kidnapping, about the jobs Vic made me do. Rivers wrote it all down. Then he said, "Your son's looking at a reduced sentence. Because he cooperated, the DA's willing to cut a deal. He'll probably do 3 years instead of 7. 3 years. Still a long time, but better than 7. Rivers said, "He's trying, Mr. Webb. I know it might not feel like it, but he's trying to do the right thing." I nodded. I wanted to believe that. I wanted to believe Terrence had changed, but I'd believed that before, and it hadn't ended well. When they released me from the hospital, I went back to my apartment. The door was still broken from when Vic's guys kicked it in. I called the landlord, and he said he'd fix it, but it would take a few days. So I stayed at a motel. A cheap place on the outskirts of town where the neon sign flickered and the carpet smelled like cigarettes. I lay on the bed and stared at the ceiling, trying to figure out what to do next. I couldn't go back to Goodyear. I'd missed too much work, and they'd already filled my position. I didn't have savings. I didn't have a plan. All I had was a broken body and a broken spirit. I thought about Terrence in jail. I thought about visiting him again, but I didn't know if I could. I didn't know if I had the strength to sit across from him and pretend everything was okay. A week later, I got a letter from him. It was short, just a few lines on a piece of notebook paper. It said, "Pops, I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't even know if I deserve it. But I want you to know I'm going to do better. I'm going to use this time to get clean, to figure out who I want to be. And when I get out, I'm going to make things right. I love you." Terrence. I read it 3 times. Then I folded it up and put it in my wallet. I didn't write back. I wasn't ready yet. But I kept the letter. Because even after everything, he was still my son, and I still loved him. I didn't know if that made me weak or strong. I didn't know if it made me a fool or a saint. I just knew it was true. 3 years passed. I got a job doing maintenance at a school. It didn't pay much, but it was steady. I moved into a smaller apartment, one I could actually afford. I started going to a church near my place. Not because I was suddenly religious, but because I needed somewhere to go on Sundays. Somewhere that wasn't empty. I made a few friends. Older folks, mostly. People who'd been through their own struggles and didn't judge me for mine. I didn't talk about Terrence much, but sometimes, late at night, I'd think about him. Wonder if he was okay. Wonder if he was really changing. Wonder if I'd ever see him again. Then one day I got a call. It was Terrence. He said, "Pops, I'm out. I did my 3 years. I'm out." My heart stopped. I asked him where he was. He said, "I'm at a halfway house in Southside. I'm working at a warehouse, trying to stay clean. I was wondering if maybe we could meet up, talk. I understand if you don't want to, but I'd really like to see you." I met him at a diner the following Saturday. He looked different, older, calmer. His face had filled out. His eyes weren't as wild. He'd grown a beard. When he saw me, he stood up and just looked at me for a long moment. Then he said, "Thanks for coming, Pops." We sat down, ordered coffee. For the first few minutes, neither of us said much. Then Terrence started talking. He told me about prison, about the programs he'd done, about the counseling, about how he'd finally admitted he had a problem and started working on it. He said, "I'm not perfect, Pops. I still struggle, but I'm trying. I'm really trying." I asked him what he was going to do now. He said, "I'm going to keep my head down, keep working, stay out of trouble, and maybe someday earn back your trust." I looked at him across that table, and I saw my son. Not the addict, not the criminal, just my son. And I realized something. I'd already forgiven him, not because he deserved it, because holding on to anger was killing me. Did I forgive him? Yeah, I did. Not all at once, not perfectly, but I forgave him. Because that's what fathers do. Because love, real love, doesn't keep score. It doesn't demand perfection. It just shows up, even when it hurts. Terrence and I meet up once a month now. We talk, sometimes about the past, sometimes about the future, sometimes about nothing at all. He's been clean for a year. He's working full time. He's even started seeing a therapist. Is he fixed? No. Is our relationship fixed? No. But we're both trying. And that's more than I had 3 years ago. Peace ain't free. It cost me my safety, my health, my savings. It cost Terrence 3 years of his life. But we found it. In a dingy diner over bad coffee and honest conversation. And that's enough. That's more than enough. If you made it this far, thank you for listening to my story. It wasn't easy to tell, but I needed to get it out. I needed people to know that even when you're at your lowest, even when your own blood betrays you, there's still a way forward. You just gotta be willing to take it. If you love these kinds of real-life stories, do me a favor. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment telling me what part of the world you're watching from. Your support means everything. Until next time, take care of yourself. And if you got people you love, hold on to them, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. Peace.